Imagine the funniest joke you've ever heard in your life or the funniest situation you've ever seen. Multiply that by like 100. Just hysterical laughing. The only thing I can describe to those who've never almost died or stared death in the face or who have um, the only thing what I do in those situations, and we all cope with differently, is I laughed. It was hilarious. Like nothing was funny, but it was the most hilarious fucking thing. And that's a phenomenon I've encountered with other folks who've had near-death experiences where, like, I danced with death and lived, and all you can do is laugh, and you fucking laugh hysterically. Oh my god.
Most people have an idea of what a drug addict is or what an alcoholic is, and I guarantee it doesn't look like them. But what people really don't understand until they've been there themselves or been around people who've been there themselves, and thankfully folks are coming to see it more and more, but it can happen to anyone. My father and mother both also obviously were very sick. They lived with substance use disorder themselves. My life was crazy, dysfunctional, all this other stuff, because at the time it seemed very normal. The thing about growing up to addict parents is that it's hard to tell what is normal, you know. I got used to chaos and really oscillating between chaos and order on the regular. That was kind of what it was. My parents were on a bender. It's like anything goes.
I don't mean to confuse you, I'm sorry.
The end result is a lovely cocktail where I learned very quickly that couldn't really trust my surroundings or the people around me. Throw that in with the fact that, it was not unusual drinking and drugging around my house when I was growing up. So that's how I learned to cope with things. From the time I was a baby, even. In fact, I remember seeing I would go over to other people's houses when I was a kid, and I'd meet other people's families, and I'd think they were perfect. It's like, what is this fucking Stepford Wives, Partridge Family bullshit? Fucking Brady Bunch over here. It's like, oh, they're not perfect. My family's just severely dysfunctional. At the time, it seemed very normal. Seemed very average. And honestly, I spent most of my childhood terrified and afraid of everyone else. I was a fairly well-behaved kid, actually. Fairly well-behaved. It was only in my later teenage years that I started... The anger underneath the surface started bubbling through to where, the occasional fight with someone who was picking on me wasn't going to stifle it. Obviously, a lot of anger, a lot of rage inside from basically being tossed around all those years like that. So, I was already into using alcohol and drugs to some degree or a lesser degree. And I had a full year left of high school, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Summer before my senior year, I walked into the Apollo office. Mr. Earp was the principal. That was what it was. Vice principal. He was the VP at the time. And I showed him my ID and said, I quit. Bye. And he talked about, he tried to tell me, well, you have to finish high school. It's like, no, I don't fucking know. I basically gave him the rundown. I was like, look, all I'm learning here is how to be an obedient worker. Or at least that's what you're trying to teach me and what you're not succeeding in teaching me. Because I'm just not that. That's not for me. And then he went into this whole spiel about, oh, you'll never amount to anything, without so many words. And are we done here? Give me the paperwork. I'm done. I'm out. And I think ultimately they were happy to see me go.
So that was that. Around the same time, I'd been getting into punk rock. And it's like, wow, these guys sound just as crazy as I feel inside. This is it. I'm going to be a punk rocker.
Here to die! Tell me fucking why!
You know, really just rebellion seemed to be, to me, the order of the day, as what would give me release, satisfaction, that sense of belonging, that sense of home. And I found very quickly, you know, it fell right in. What it gave me at the time was briefly, very briefly, a sense of belonging to certain people within the scene. That felt nice. What else it gave me is access to copious amounts of liquor and drugs, because that's just par for the course in a band. But by this time, my drug and alcohol use had gotten ramped up, and I also had gained a hell of a lot of weight because of the cocktail and medications that I was on. Like, I always much preferred hard liquor and hard drugs. Weed and beer was, I had a very dismissive attitude towards it, where it's like, why don't you grow up and do an adult drug, like heroin or cocaine? But it's like it's not enough. I need more. Considering that later on a hand-up would last me like a day, maybe 2 or 3. Yeah, not as bad as it was gonna get. I found Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. I applied, wrote an essay for them, and I got in. Not only did I get in, they agreed to pay most of my tuition. I guess the essay was that good. My drinking and drugging, which was already, pretty enough that people who were paying attention could say, yeah, Matt's kind of got a problem. He's a good guy, but he's clearly likes his booze a bit too much. Well, once again, people saw the booze. They didn't see the drug use behind the scenes, because that was like what I learned anyway from the beginning. It's like, yeah, this is stuff I do by myself without people, really. I joked that I was a functional alcoholic for quite a few years after that. I remember I came home one night after a hell of a bender night on the town. At this point, I was using generally a combination, plenty of liquor, obviously, but various stimulants, opiates combined with psychedelics, and before I went off all my meds, my sleeping pills at the end of the night. Funny how heroin kind of negates the need for sleeping meds, though. So, at this time, too, I'd also lost a tremendous amount of fucking weight, because obviously when you go off all your meds and switch to heroin, that kind of... You shed pounds very rapidly. I don't recommend it as a means to lose weight to anyone. But I remember showing up after my first stint at like a rehab thing, and people were looking at me like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. So that was the summer before my last year at Naropa. And it's summer in Boulder, and suddenly I'm mostly by myself in this dormitory because, well, summer in a college town. It was nice. I had a very cool 2-bedroom, 2-story apartment to myself in the Snowline dorms there. and fresh out of rehab, still using psychedelics and some other stuff, not drinking though. And I was kind of face to face like, well, I have to do the work now, but I don't want to do the work. I reverted back to some behaviors that I remembered previously that seemed to give me some satisfaction. Acting. I began to consciously create and play a role that was obviously not me. It was in many ways an idealized version of myself. Like all the parts of me that I knew were there, just all the parts that I didn't like, gone. What this amounted to was I was putting on this role and doing it fairly convincingly to people who hadn't met me before. And before I knew it, enough people who I did know before were willing to either co-sign my bullshit or actually did believe me. Which, I mean, I imagine there was a bit of both. So the person that I was pretending to be name was Matthew Alistair McRoberts. Originally an immigrant from West Belfast, north of Ireland. Seemed to be a role that I could take on, right? The idea that, okay, grew up in same age as I am now, born around the same time, just born in western part of Belfast, in late Troubles era, north of Ireland. Matt McRoberts was Matt, but he was an idealized version of myself, essentially. And I knew it. I was well aware of it. But the more I stepped into the role, the more I played the role, and the more others either, like I said, co-signed my bullshit or thought that that was the real me, the more external gratification and satisfaction I got out of playing the role. And consequently, the more tortured I felt inside because I knew I was lying. I wasn't bullshitting. I just didn't want to be me. It puts a tremendous strain on an individual, psychologically. I chose it. I chose it willingly and gladly. I found I was capable of doing things that I never thought I could do, both for better and for worse. And I ran with it because at a certain point, I realized as the summer was coming to an end, like, wow, if I come clean now, it's gonna be really fucking awkward. So I doubled down, and kept doubling down until basically I burned my whole life down. I was getting back into opiates, and I was out. There's a reason people go back to using that. It's not just because it's, was my way of coping. It's also because the withdrawals are fucking hell. Call it dope sickness. It's really unpleasant. Dope sickness, heroin or opiate withdrawal, it's like, imagine the worst flu you've ever had times 10. Imagine the worst emotional pain you've ever felt. The worst heartbreak, the most broken you've ever felt emotionally. Multiply that by 10. And the two combined, that's what dope sickness felt like for me. Doing anything to kind of negate and take away that pain, even if it means going back to the very drug you're trying so goddamn hard to get off of. This did not bring me to that rock bottom, though. I thought it was. I thought, oh, I can't possibly get any worse than that. It would get worse, man. Had a couple of really bad days in a row, not to mention going through dope sickness still. Got into a confrontation that did not end well with my roommates, to the point where I felt I had to leave immediately. I did. And when eventually got back to administration about what had happened, they did the right thing. They kicked me out. Totally valid. There's a period there after getting kicked out of university where, I was moving from town to town as quickly as I could, just trying to stay one step ahead of like, oh, they're going to find out who I really am yet. Oh, they're going to find out who I really am yet. Got to keep moving, Because at a certain point, you realize that I've done enough shit at this point that is not only illegal, but definitely immoral and unethical to land me either in very hot water with the police and authorities, or to get me thrown in a fucking ditch as a corpse. I ended up in this beautiful fucking village in the high mountains in Colorado. And I got taken in by these people who had heard a bit about me. They knew me from various interactions I'd had with people on their periphery or in their community. I was homeless, on the run for the most part, living in a storage shed that my most recent ex had rented for me. And yeah, they took me in, but they didn't have to. Adopted me, if you will. I think they were always a bit distrustful and always like waiting to see, which is good for them. But I did take advantage of their kindness. And when I got back, that was something that I wrestled with for quite a while, actually, the guilt, because these people, they took me in, they showed me how to live, how to really live. And getting a taste of that, you know, part of the reason maybe why I stopped running and moving from place to place so quickly. Because I finally found what I was looking for. I had felt. And when they found out who I really was, they kicked me out. Rightfully so. And it was then, at that moment, where I wasn't sure if I was going to live or die. I wasn't sure if I was going to get off the mountain alive. I wasn't sure if what I was going to do, frankly. It was one of those moments where nothing has gone how I wanted it to, how I expected it to. It was in that moment of complete nothing makes sense anymore. Who am I? What the fuck? I know I've been lying. I can't do this anymore. That finally I was able to get humble and admit I can't do this anymore. I can't do any of this anymore. I called my mother and father, who I had not spoken to in like a year. Still in active addiction, but they bought me a plane ticket home, no questions asked. And I'm not even back a week, and I get picked up for felony assault. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, ultimately, but it was confusing as shit for me at the time because I remember I have a choice. I can go one of two ways. I can turn my life around, I can become who I always was meant to be, who I really am, or I could keep pretending to be someone I'm not. Because then I have to do all this hard work on myself. But unlike before, I actually started doing it. I got several jobs because I knew that staying with my folks was not going to be, not a good idea. Initially, it's what I needed. But I knew shortly after being reacquainted with them that as much as my mother and father claimed to have changed, they were still the same old folks that they always were. I knew that, okay, I want to be healthy, and I'm not going to learn how to be healthy from y'all. Finally got the call from my public defender that charges against me had been dismissed. Free to go. No probation, no prison, no fines. Like, literally, charges dropped. Oh, wow, I actually have my whole life ahead of me now, and I'm not looking at 10 years in prison. So there was an adjustment period. It did feel at the time like my own personal higher power was giving me a God wink, where it's like, okay, you think that you're bad. You think that you're tough. You think that you're rough. Want to go to prison? Find out?
That's too why it doesn't bother me so much to be in St. Cloud anymore, to be back here, because one, I know that this is a temporary thing. Just as all things are temporary, no matter how beautiful or how horrible. Appreciate everything you got and every moment you have, because you don't know when it's going to be over.
I eventually knew that I didn't want to do all of it on my own, basically. So I stumbled into a recovery meeting, one of the 12-step fellowships for the first time, and I've been going back ever since. Within, like, authentic recovery, and for me, I just quantify that as before getting into a program of recovery, my program of recovery, I was abstaining for the most part, and fucking miserable, honestly. Like, doing all this stuff, being a part of it, even working all those jobs, giving the satisfaction of owning my own place, and all this other stuff, I was still miserable. It was through actually working a program of recovery that I began to enjoy life again. And that I began to see that, maybe I hadn't made mistakes. Maybe I just had a lot of lessons that I needed to learn. It was through my program of recovery that I don't feel guilty about the things I did anymore.
Igne nato renovato integra. All of nature is renewed in fire. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. New life comes from death. Very beautiful reminder.
What I would like my story to be for other folks, or at least what my story to show other folks, is that they don't need things outside of them. That everything they want, they already are. And I would hope that, my path, I just had to go the extreme fucking route to discover that everything I want, I already am. I want to continue my education, pick up where I left off, and finish my bachelor's degree and eventually get a master's. I'm looking at getting my LICSW, which is Licensed Independent Clinical Social Worker. I have found that it's within that setting, which specializes more in therapy, that I can be of service in a way that is satisfying for me, certainly, which is more important than making money to me, but also kind of giving back what I've been given so freely. It feels to me like a good beginning. It feels to me like a good start.